Hey guys, we made it to day 10. Day 10 of 21 days, guys. We are halfway there. Halfway there. How exciting. So today we want to talk about soliciting God's involvement in our nation. So our scriptures today is found in Job 12, 23 and 24. And it says, He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and disperses them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of their reason. He makes them wander in a trackless waste. So I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I first read that, just those two verses, because I do that intentionally. I read those two verses just to see where my heart is when I read that, and then I read the chapter as a whole so that I can get the real context. So when I read just those two verses by themselves, it made me a little confused. Because the God that I know doesn't sound like a God that makes things great and then he destroys them. He makes things big and then he disperses them. Makes nations big and then disperses them. Like, very contradictory to the God that I know. So that was my first initial reaction, if you want to call it that, when I read it. So I definitely was encouraged to say, what are they talking about? Because that's not the God that I know. And when I read it in context, I started to realize that it was Job who was talking to his friends that were around him. He was in a really tough situation. But he's telling them, but the God that I serve, he's big enough to make nations great. He's big enough that those nations that may not be, that it may be big and shouldn't be big or whatever reason, he can make them smaller. Like, the whole point is the greatness and how big and powerful God is. And he's talking about in a nation, using a nation for example. So that really impacted me when first of all, it checked me what my initial impression was when I read it. So it made me recognize that things out of context can be completely blown out of proportion and misunderstood. So it showed me the greatness of God. But then we go to Proverbs 11:14. And Proverbs 11:14 says, "For lack of guidance, a nation falls. But victory is won through many advisors." And so today we want to ask God to be involved in our nation. And we know what's happening in our nations today. We just look at the news. We read what's happening on social media. Like, there's just so many things happening in our nation. And sometimes we feel like there's not enough that we can do to make a difference. But Proverbs 11:14 says, "For the lack of guidance, a nation falls. But victory is won through many advisors." Let us pray. Let us be diligent in our attempt, in our goal to bring God into our nation. And how do we do that? Praying for our leaders, praying for our government. We know there's so much corruption in the world. We know there's so many things that are happening, but we can't control that. But you know what? God made everyone, and Jesus died on the cross for every single human being, every single one of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Jesus died on the cross for them. So there's grace for them. There's forgiveness for them. There's hope for them. There's salvation for them. Let us pray for our nation. Let's ask God to come into our world today. And how we can start with doing that? Again, praying for our leaders, praying for our president, praying for legislation, praying for all of our leaders, but starting from the top all the way down. But you know what? Starting with us, because we can influence our government. We can influence our leaders in our church, leaders in our schools, leaders in our jobs. I mean, that God can make a difference in our nation, it starts with us. Let us be the people that change the world. Let us bring the light of Christ to this world. And again, we look at the bigger picture and we get so overwhelmed. I mean, when I read that first couple verses, I was like, wow, God is huge. God is big. But it says, victory is won through many advisors. May we be a nation that is guided by God. May we be advisors that bring forth God's victory. May you be that leader that make a difference. May you be that person that is so influential in the small things that maybe you think is insignificant. It's not. Nothing is missed by God. God is in our details. God is in all of that. Let you and I bring God to our nation. And even if we're here from another country, especially if we're here from another country, may God be in our nation here in America. May it be in our nation wherever you may be. because God is the creator of all things, of all places. Therefore, let's always remember to bring him into our nation. And it starts with us. Again, be blessed. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and please share your comments with me. Tell me a little bit about your journey, what's happening in your life. I would love to hear about you. Have a wonderful one. See you tomorrow.